All right, so today we're going to be taking notes on federalism. Grab my pointer here, get out of there. All right, so we actually talked and mentioned federalism a little bit earlier in the year. It's one of those systems of government where the federal and state governments share power. So a couple important concepts here. And this is what I was talking about, we talked about this earlier. Under the Articles of Confederation, which was the United States' first form of government after the Revolutionary War, we were a confederacy, which meant that the 13 colonies were really like 13 independent little countries. It was a very weak central government, and it fell apart. Under the British rule, we were a unitary system where the king had all the power. The national government had all the power. Neither of these worked for us. The Confederacy, where the states had the power, was the national government was too weak. The unitary system, where the king had all the power, the national government was too strong. So we created federalism, a form of government where the federal and state governments share power. And so federalism is the idea that the states and the national government share power. Some things are national or federal government's power, some things are state power, some things they share powers. National and state government share power. This limits the power of the federal government by giving power to the states. And here's some pictures representing federalism. You see national government, state government sharing power. Here you see a picture of the regional, which would be state governments, and central, which would be federal government sharing power. Again, this was a way to limit the power of the federal government, but also have a strong enough federal government that could do important things that needed to be done. All right, so we have three forms of government. We have three forms of government. We have a national government, a state government, and a local government. There's one federal government, the U.S. government, Washington, D.C. There are 50 state governments. Every state has their own government. And then the state governments are broken into local governments. There's over 90,000 local governments. So we have the U.S. government, the Florida government, and then you have the Palm Coast local government. Okay, so powers that are specifically given to the federal government are called express or delegated powers. Remember, we talked about this in the legislative branch when we talked about the Constitution. Expressed or delegated powers are the powers of the national government that are listed in the U.S. Constitution. And we talked about these, and maybe you remember some of these: coining money, regulating trade between states and between countries, running the military, declaring war, conducting foreign relations. These are delegated powers of the federal government. Only the national government can do these things. So here's some examples. You have the mail system, the military, money. These are all powers of the federal national government. Okay, so reserved powers. You need to know what this phrase is. Reserved powers are powers that belong to state and local governments. It gets its name from the 10th Amendment. If you remember, the 10th Amendment states that powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states. This is the amendment that the Anti-Federalists wanted, to reserve states' rights and states' power. And it is the one that gives the states powers. That's why state powers are called reserved powers. So some example of reserved powers: regulating trade within the state. If it's more than one state, it's a delegated power of the federal government. Trade within the state is a reserved power. Passing licenses like driver's license, marriage licenses is a state power. Conducting elections is up to the 50 states. So right now, all 50 states are passing different laws on elections because elections are up to the states. The states also get to establish local governments. And so powers of the states include establishing public schools, licenses, conducting elections. Here you see some of those powers. Licenses, elections, making laws for the state of Florida. Those are reserved powers. Okay, and then we also have local government. And so concurrent powers are powers that both the federal and state governments share. So the federal and state governments can collect taxes, borrow money, establish courts. That's why we have federal courts and state courts. Define crimes and punishments, make laws. These are powers that are called concurrent powers that are shared by the federal and state government. So concurrent means shared. reserved are state powers, and federal powers of the federal government are called delegated or expressed. You need to know what each of those phrases mean and examples for each. Okay, so if a federal government and a state government have laws that conflict, they're opposite. So the federal government says you can do this, the state government says you can't do this. There is a part of the Constitution called the Supremacy Clause, which you see in the pictures here at the bottom. The Supremacy Clause states that the U.S. Constitution of the federal government is supreme, which means it trumps any conflicting laws from states. So if the state of Florida passes a law that the federal government says they can't do, then the federal government wins. It's like the trump card. It's the supreme law of the land. So if there are conflicting laws, the federal government wins. So again, powers of the national government are called expressed or delegated powers. Powers of state governments are called reserve powers, and then concurrent powers are powers they share. You will most likely see a Venn diagram like this on your EOC. So make sure that you understand expressed powers in national government, concurrent powers the two governments share, state governments are reserved to the states. Okay, so we have three levels of government in this country. Not just three branches of government, but also three levels of government. So we have federal government, state government, and local government. And for each level of government, there are three branches. So the legislative branch at the federal level is called Congress. The legislative branch at the state level is called the Florida Legislature. And the legislative branch at the local level is called City Council. Same with the executive branch. The executive branch at the national level is the president. The executive branch at the state level is called the governor, and the executive branch at the local level is called a mayor. Same with courts. Federal government, Supreme Court, state government, Florida Supreme Court, and local government, county court. Those are those local courts we talked about. So again, about federalism, we talked earlier in the year about Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Remember, Federalists wanted to ratify the Constitution. They wanted a very strong national government. Anti-Federalists wanted a strong state government. So the compromise was really federalism, because you do have a strong federal government, but the state governments also have their power. And that's that tug and war of federalism. The federal government has some power, state governments have some powers, and it really works out for us. Okay. There's some important things there, but all right. That is it for now. Thank you.